Alright, here we go. So I hope y'all didn't think I wasn't going to play the new cards, the Ishizu cards. 100% you know I'm going to. I always do play the best of the best. My opponent is going to be really stupid right here and activate a Maxi. Now, once y'all see the deck that he's playing, you should not be running Maxi in this deck because if you just so happen to draw the cards that are important to your engine, you fuck yourself over with these decks. And he doesn't have enough of a specific card to make this deck super consistent. He only runs one of it. So if you hard draw it, it fucks you over. So I'll show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So I'll go ahead and activate Orange Light. So instead of him getting cards drawn off of Maxi, he ends up losing 10 cards out of his deck. Now let's see what I milled. So the first milled, I milled his Genius Loci, which is a starter. I also milled his twin, which means that he needs one more of these in his deck to be able to make plays. If he has it in his hand, it fucks over the consistency, and he pretty much is a GG's unless he's running three of these. But let's see. So then I mill five more, end up hitting one of his floodgates, Cactus Bouncer. Um, this card basically means that you can't, neither player can special summon. I also mill another one of his floodgates, Rivalry of Warlords, and milled off quite a few hand traps. We got Maxi here. We also got Crossout Designator, Ghost Bell, Ash Blossom. That's quite a few good hand traps that were hit right there, which is fine by me. Then I'm going to shuffle these three cards back into my deck so that way I can do some more madness. I use the effect of my Medora there, so I still got another Medora and another Keldo that I can use on my opponent's turn. I'm going to go ahead and get my draw 3 effect right here, drawing into 2 Diviners and then a Smithing Storm. Going to Changing, and I do make a misplay. Not a big misplay, but it is a misplay. He activates Imperm right here. I'm going to activate Keldo. Oh yeah, just in case y'all don't know, if you activate Keldo or Medora, either one of these two cards, it basically makes this card activate. So then you can then banish something. So this cards are quick effects. So you can banish something on your opponent's field and something in their graveyard as a, like, basically you can use these to trigger this card. It's not really a quick effect because it doesn't happen at quick effect speed. Whatever chain is going on is going to resolve first and then this will activate. But basically you can then banish something. Hopefully that makes sense. So you don't have to rely on your Runicks to banish with Changing. And the misplay that I made, I was trying to summon a monster out with Smithing Storm, but for whatever reason, I banished more cards, which was all I hit really was just a Call by the Grave. Draw into a Kelbeck and a Guido, so my opponent is going to have a nightmare once I start making plays with these cards. But he pretty much scoops because his deck's consistency was absolutely destroyed. And let me show you exactly why his consistency was absolutely destroyed. For one, he's running one of these cards. You need two of these right here because if you hard draw it, it destroys the consistency of this deck as far as the combos go. Um, and on top of that, yeah, I mean, me, I run two. I'll show you guys my deck so that no way it makes sense and you understand what I mean. I understand how this deck plays, but you need to. Here's mine's. So I don't play the Rika variation, so maybe he only needed one. I don't know. Maybe he only needed one. But I run two in case I hard draw one. It doesn't like brick my deck up. And I also do the U-Link. So basically that's where you basically use both extra monster zones, yours plus the one that your opponent would use. You link off and make a extra link. So basically makes it to where it locks your opponent out of being able to link summon. So pretty much makes it almost impossible for them to play, and they can't really summon anything because their field will be filled up with like all these tokens, so they have to tribute summon, basically using their normal summon super crazy how it all works, how it all plays out. So yeah, Sun Avalon deck right here, right? Now, let me show the deck that I actually was playing against him. I did change this deck up slightly by adding these two sprite elves. So these two were not in the gameplay when I was playing, but I added them in. Basically, I took these two. If these two weren't in, I had one more of these and one more of these. That's basically how it was. Alright, so basically, I've done a lot of play testing. I had Herald of a Green Light in here. I took those out because I was just struggling with this deck, struggling super hard. Once I took those out, I noticed that it plays a lot better. Herald of Green Light never really negates anything when you need it to. It only really negates like spell card. Most people use spell cards as baits anyways. So it was like basically I was getting baited out for nothing. Herald of Orange Light works so much better because when they normal something and then use this effect and then you activate this and then you mill 5 or potentially 10 cards off of Kelbeck and Elgato, it absolutely just ruins your opponent's day, makes it super hard for them to play. If you mill 10 cards out of their deck and they just use their normal summon, you probably made their deck so inconsistent depending on what they're playing, just like the deck that you just saw, right? And Herald of Diviner of Herald, this card right here is super good starter. Basically, you could just start milling stuff, and if you're milling 10 of your own cards, that means you're probably hitting some of your Runicks, meaning that you're going to get that draw 3 effect more frequent, drawing into more of these cards, meaning that now if you draw another Herald of Orange Light, you can use the effect again on your opponent's turn or on your own turn, whichever turn. Once you end your turn, you'll be able to do it again and mill more cards, potentially making your opponent lose 5 or 10 more cards, meaning that if you hit 10 the first time, potentially 20 cards now. Medora and Keldo can basically shuffle cards back into your deck, so you can shuffle back the Kelbeck and Elgato, so you can do it all over again, making the mills more consistent. So each time you do it, the mills become more consistent, and you're constantly drawing 3 cards, so you're getting closer and closer to making, like, the more you use these cards, the more consistent they become, because the more you start milling, the more you start getting cards that you don't need into the graveyard and cards that you do need milled. So like Foolish Burial, pretty much you can just immediately start milling with Foolish Burial. Terraforming is just a card just to get access to one of your fountains in hand. But once you get the fountains in graveyard, you can just start using Gary to just add them back to hand. And here's the funny thing, right? Gary, like, let's say if I ran Gary at 1, right? And I use Gary, it hits the graveyard, it's not over with. Kelbeck, or Keldo, I mean, and Medora can shuffle this card back into the deck. So now you don't actually have to run so many of these cards for consistency purposes, because these cards can just shuffle them back into the deck at quick effect speed from your graveyard. The only reason I really run 2 is because if one of them gets called by the grave. If they get called by the grave, I have a way of getting them back quickly back into my extra deck. But if they get called by the grave, it still doesn't matter, and I'll explain why. Now, this is the one card that I don't see anybody run, and I wanted to show this so then that way you guys can see why I run it and why I think this card is one of the best cards to run if you're going to be running these new cards, these Ishizu cards. This card should always be in a deck, and you should always have some kind of way of getting to it, which is why I have the Diviner. I got this card at 3 because I want to get to this card quickly and get it onto the field. This card right here, Psyframe Lord Omega. Right? Now, how do I get to Psyframe Lord Omega? Well, let's say any Runic, right? Any Runic card, quick play, plus Diviner of Herald. Basically, a normal Diviner of Herald. Activate its effect. I don't even do this first. I usually start off with this. with one of my Runicks, bring out the level 2. Level 2 will discard, grab the field spell, whatever the case may be. Normal Diviner, send Kelbeck or Elgato. That'll mill 5 cards. And then I use, this will go to level 6. This will be at level 2 still. Use this plus this to go into this. Because now I got a level 6 tuner on the field. Level 6 tuner plus a level 2 Hugin go into Cyframe Lord Omega. Why is this card good? I'll give you 3 reasons why, and all 3 of this card's effects, right? The first effect, I'll start off with the most important effect of this card, which is the effect that happens on your opponent's standby phase. For this particular deck at least. Once per turn, during your opponent's standby phase, you can target 1 banished card and return it to the graveyard. Well, what the hell would be banished in your deck that you need this effect? Medora and Kelbeck. Or Medora and Keldo, I'm sorry. Medora and Keldo, when you banish them to activate their effects, basically now they're offline. And sometimes you use both of these cards. So sometimes you're hesitant to use these effects because they're like, once you use them, you can't get them back, right? That's the whole point of that. So this card unbanishes them. So now you can use them again on your opponent's turn at that. Then after that, this card has another effect. And then it has another effect, right? So the next effect would be during your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can banish cards, this card, and 1 card from your opponent's hand, meaning that your opponent can't just activate something, they can't just do something to basically stop you from being able to use this card's effect. They can't like really imperm it because you can jump this card off the field. I mean, they can imperm it, but would they want to? It would be wasting an imperm at that point because the effect have already gone off to unbanish something. So now you can jump this card off the field and banish 1 card out of their hand, making their hand more inconsistent after you've already started basically shuffling stuff. Like you've already started sending stuff to the graveyard, making their deck more inconsistent. Then now you're making their hand more inconsistent. And on top of that, you'll be able to do it again. This card will be banished. They can't call by the grave it, whatever the case may be, because it's banished instead, right? Now, let's say they use Dark Ruler No More on you, or something like Droplet or something like that, right? Beforehand, and they don't banish this card. It goes to the graveyard. Well, on your turn, this card has a third effect. You can target 1 other card in the graveyard, shuffle both that card and this card from the graveyard into the deck, making this card almost never a dead card. The only way this card is dead is if they banish this card after they negate it. So they have to use 2 things on this card. They have to negate it first to stop you from jumping it off the field, and then they have to banish it. Or, I mean, unless they have a way of banishing this card before it can jump off the field, basically. Which, the only way to really stop that is to negate it and stop it from jumping off the field beforehand, right? I don't know. It doesn't send this cost, so it's a hard card to deal with, is what I'm trying to say, right? Now, there are more cards in this deck. You also got your Chang Ying, which is what I brought out in the gameplay. You got Baron de Fleur. You got Baguska. I've done this before. Baguska is devastating to your opponents. So easy to bring out Baguska in this deck because of how the Kelbecks and the Guidos and all of these new cards work. You can basically like summon them onto the field. You can go Gary if you want to. If you can't get another one of these onto the field, one of them does send a card and then special summon another level 4 or whatever, or normal a level 4, and then you can basically go into Baguska, and then your opponents can't really do anything. They have to just sit there and just keep just waiting until the materials all leave. You also got Abyss Dweller. You could simply Baguska, attack, go into Zeus, Super devastating. You don't have to have two Sprite Elves. If this card gets sent to the graveyard, you could simply shuffle this card right back with Keldo or Medora. So really, you don't have to have multiple copies of just about anything here, because these cards will save your ass when these cards hit the graveyard. So you can run much more extra deck monsters in this deck compared to other decks, if that makes sense. Because these come in clutch and they save your ass. So yeah. Like I said, I did have some Herald of Green Lights in here, but I took those all out. I wanted this deck to play much more consistent. I did craft a bunch of the new cards like Exchange of Spirit, Exchange of Despair and Hope, whatever the case. And I did craft, where is it at? You know what? Let's go here. There it is. Gravekeeper's Trap and Exchange of Spirit. I want to try these cards out, but I don't know. I do want to try them out, but whatever. Yeah. So super crazy. I also have wanted to try out the Punk engine, but there's one card that I still need to get, which is this one here, Dear Note. So I do want to try that out, but as of right now, I just don't have Dear Note. Let's see. And then there is another card that I want to talk about. Keystone. Keystone can basically do what Cyframe Lord Omega does. So like, let's say if you take Keystone, you run Keystone in the deck as well, along with Keldo and Medora, right? Basically, what you can do is you can use Medora and Keldo to send cards back into the deck. Use Nemesis Keystone to unbanish these, putting them back into your deck as well. So then that way, when you're playing in a more grindy style game where you're using up all your resources to make plays, namely a deck like Sprite, you're using up all your resources. I mean, you only get 2 starters, right? You only really put 1 smasher in your deck. Where you're using up all your resources to make all these plays, this will basically fix those consistency issues, put stuff back into your deck so you can make more plays. Now, let's say you don't want to run that one card because you may see it as a brick. It may not come up when you need it, whatever the case may be. Well, that's where putting Medora and Keldo into your deck and then running something like that other card that I was talking about, the Cyframe Lord Omega. That way, once you mill them, you go into Cyframe Lord Omega, and then every time this card comes back onto the field, you unbanish that Medora or Keldo, get it into the graveyard again somehow, whether that's through mills or whatever the case may be, unshuffle the combo pieces that you need. Let's say if it's starter, smashers, whatever the case may be, now you can continue to make plays. Super powerful. And this card right here makes it, that'll basically make it a unbrick 3 cards, or like put 3 cards back into the deck that you need to continue to make crazy plays, potentially even more, every single turn. Just crazy. But yeah, hopefully you guys like the videos. I've talked a lot about this, but there's so much potential here. And I mean, there's while I'm here, I mean, you can click off the video whenever, but I think it's just like cool to really talk about like a lot of the stuff that you can do, like the potential that you can do with these cards, right? I've already kind of showed the deck list, so if you don't really care about like what I'm talking about now, I understand leaving. But I've also tried these cards out with zombies. Now I took them out and I put my zombie deck back to how it was, but when I was using it, I didn't try it with left arm offering. Um, I tried it out, but there's some crazy stuff that you can do, which is why I crafted these punk cards right here. There's some crazy stuff that you can do where you can start milling like crazy, using basically that grass is greener, the punk engine, left arm offering, and then emergency teleport. Basically, you can mill all of your zombie stuff, and then you can just start going into a whole bunch of like really crazy synchro plays. Now, I don't have all the cards in here, but there's another card. Hopefully I can find it. Here it is, Shinobi Necro. If you run Shinobi Necro, Chaos Ruler, all those different like mill cards and all of that stuff, the Herald, the Punk Engine, all of that stuff, like with the new Ishizu cards, you can build some insane boards. Now I done it, I tried it out. I couldn't get it as consistent as I like, so I just have not made a video on it. For sure, once I craft that last punk card that I need, then I'll try it again. But for right now, I gotta tell y'all, there's some craziness. I just couldn't get it as consistent as I needed it to be to make plays, to where I just pretty much just stopped playing it. But I'm going to definitely be trying it again. This particular deck right here is absolutely brutal to my opponents. I've been abusing this card, and that's what made me even talk about this card, is because I used to abuse this card with Mizuki in this particular deck before. So I know how it plays already. I was abusing it. And so now, seeing it with those new cards, being able to shuffle back cards that get milled that you don't want in the graveyard. And look, Keystone's here. This is my zombie world deck, and look, nobody ever runs Keystone. I was running Keystone because basically there's some crazy stuff that happens where when you get Keystone with this particular deck, if you get Keystone and Gozuki, basically these become like almost a loop. It's not an infinite loop, but it almost becomes a loop where you can banish Keystone, and once you banish Keystone with Gozuki from the graveyard. See, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can banish one zombie monster from your graveyard. It's a special summon one zombie from your hand. So, what I was doing was putting Eldritch into my hand from the graveyard, not activating its effect to special summon it, leaving it there, banishing Nemesis Keystone, using Gozuki, summoning Eldritch. Keystone would go back into my hand afterwards, and then, of course, later you would send one zombie from your deck back into the graveyard, basically looping all the plays and doing it all over again, right? And the way you get this card back on the field was through Mizuki, if it got knocked off the field in some kind of way. So you use Mizuki, put Mizuki back into the graveyard or back into the deck, whatever the case may be. You can use Keystone to unbanish Mizuki, and you just basically get like these crazy loops that just happen, and your opponent's using all their resources to pretty much stop those loops. And while you're doing all of this, you're making plays. These are special summons that are happening, and you're using those special summons to make plays. You're using them to go into synchros. You're using them to go into cards like the Zombie Vampire, the Vampire Sucker, Nightmare Unicorn, Access Code Talker, Underworld Goddess. Like, you're making plays, and they're sitting there using their resources to stop loops that you're going to do again next turn. Like, it's just insane. Eldritch can pop something. You can pop cards on the field with Eldritch, put it back into your hand, don't summon it out, and just use these effects to just keep making plays. Like, it's super, super, super crazy. So yeah. Hopefully you guys, I know this was long-winded, but I just wanted to talk about the potential of these new cards. And I know that this is an old deck right here, but hopefully if you guys craft this deck right here and you play it, you'll find that this is insane. Now, this is one of the most brutal, like, inboards that I think you could play, and it's just 2 cards. If you open Rivalry of the Warlords and Zombie World, it's pretty much a GG. You win the game. I don't know if y'all ever played anybody who has used these 2 cards against you, but it's one of the most broken strategies in this game. And the sad part about it is, it used to be if you got rid of Rivalry, you were okay. But now, if Rivalry gets milled, if you see both get milled, and then you see those new Keldo and Medora get milled as well, these cards can get put back into the deck. Meaning, they just made this deck more consistent because they mill off pretty much everything. Mill off as much of this deck as they can, using stuff like grass, using a bunch of the other cards. They just mill off everything, start putting everything out, and then they draw into Rivalry, set the card, you're pretty much done for. Once they flip this card and Zombie World's on the field, GG's, my boy. You activate Harpy's Feather Duster, you destroy this card, you destroy Zombie World, GG. Okay, good. You successfully gotten their floodgates off the field. And then you see Keldo or Medora activate. And then you see Necro World Zombie or Necro World Banshee activate, putting Zombie World back onto the field. And then you see these 3 cards or these 2 cards go back into the deck. You're just like, now I gotta deal with it again. So funny. So funny. But yeah,